Hello friends, my name's James, and this is my 1965 Albert 30 sloop SV Tritea. I have been slowly sailing around the world since leaving Los Angeles in 2021. Since that time, I've covered more than 17,000 nautical miles, from the Hawaiian Islands to French Polynesia, New Zealand to Australia, and more. I crossed the largest ocean on the planet solo. Join me as I continue my way through Southeast Asia, exploring its jungles, seeing its wildlife, and experiencing cultures far different from my own. This is the magic of seeing the world by sail. Welcome to my A Sailor's Guide to Indonesia video. I've done a number of these boater's guides videos for different countries and places I've visited to try to give people a lay of the land before they visit, from things that I learned through research or through experience. This one's going to be kind of extensive. I spent 10 months in Indonesia with 4.5 months of active cruising time. There was 5.5 months of downtime where I got stuck there during the wet season. We'll talk about that. I covered 3,000 miles. 2,000 of those miles were done motoring because there's little to no wind in Indonesia, which we'll discuss. I'm going to be talking about the bureaucracy that you can expect when visiting Indonesia, both clearing in, clearing out, bad fuel and how to deal with that, kind of everything that I experienced. Before I visited Indonesia, through all my research, I never got what I feel was an accurate take on the country, so that's why I'm making this video. The things that I found to be true and my experiences were not clearly represented in anything that I read from other cruisers. So I'm going to give my take based on my experiences. As I said, I covered 3,000 miles from eastern Indonesia all the way up to the Singapore Strait. So I covered a lot of ground, spent a lot of time there, and this is what I experienced. If you find value in this video and you would like to contribute, you can do one-off contributions through my PayPal, through Venmo, Cash App, or you can become a patron as a thank you if you find that you find value in the videos that I produce, either for educational or entertainment value. So these types of videos don't get many views, so I don't make much off of the ad revenue on a video like this, but I believe that they have really great value for cruisers, so I take my time to make this type of video even though it doesn't really benefit me financially. I do it for the community and for you to try to make your life easier than my life was before I went to Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is widely known to be one of the most challenging places to visit when cruising in the trade wind route, when it comes to the bureaucracy and the sort of nightmare paperwork that you have to deal with. One of the biggest challenges is that the rules change overnight with no rhyme or reason. They can just kind of pull the rug out from under you at any time, which is what happened to me when I was clearing out. This was like pretty widely known, and I knew this going into it. I'd read a lot. Now, if you're not familiar with the website Noonsite, that is like the gold standard for information about clearing in and out of any country. So you can go to Noonsite, you can go to any single country, and it'll give you the formalities, and they update those as they change. You can also check the reviews on Noonsite, and it will, cruisers might give information that hasn't quite been updated inside the website yet. So Noonsite is a great place to find out the formalities. So I knew heading into Indonesia that it was going to be sort of a nightmare, and I also knew that they had made it so that you didn't legally have to get an agent anymore, which is good, because this one agent that a lot of people used would, at one of the price lists I saw, he was charging like $1,000 or something like that to clear people in and out of Indonesia, which is completely insane. This guy Raymond, who I never dealt with because I saw his price list and it was crazy. So it was good that they made it so you don't legally have to use an agent anymore. But a thing to know about Indonesia and probably many countries where corruption exists and is commonplace is that it doesn't matter what the law is. Whoever is in charge of clearing you in and out, whoever the officials are in whatever small port you're pulling into, or big port for that matter, whatever they decide that you have to do, that's what you have to do. So we cleared into the Kai Islands, and I went ahead and hired an agent and got a hold of one ahead of time because I had messaged with a few people who were ahead of us that we knew, cruisers, and they suggested, they're like, you have to get an agent, so get an agent. They're like, it's better to do it ahead of time. Highly advise against using street agents. There's this one dude in the Kai Islands specifically that has like hosed up a bunch of people's paperwork because he didn't know what he was doing and still charging them like several $100s and stuff, but had no clue what he was doing and messed things up for a lot of people. So avoid street agents. Look for like agents that other cruisers have used and recommend, and go from there. We used a dude named Kim. Well, he goes by the name Kim, who we found through No Foreign Land. So No Foreign Land app is the greatest app out currently for reliable information. We went, and then if you click on like the different immigration offices and stuff wherever you're planning on going, usually like people have already entered all entered like the sequence of offices you have to go to, what you have to do, as well as agents' names and their WhatsApp and like their experience, and then people can review that agent as well and say, I had a great experience with this person, or this person screwed me over and did this. So No Foreign Land is another great resource to visit to see any place, to get sort of like really up-to-date info about what's happening on the ground. So we hired this dude Kim. He was great for us, worked really good for us. I think we paid him $100. I can't remember. It'll say on the episode of the clearing in that I put out, but I think we paid him $100 US or $150 US or something. And on top of, we had already paid like $200 or something for our visas that we had to get before we arrived. We got those when we were in Australia. So we handled all our visa stuff and everything. All Kim did is like when we showed up, we went to the shore and he took us to each of the offices, and he came out with the quarantine officer, looked over the boat, he came out with the customs people, and then went to the offices with us, helped us fill out all the paperwork. That's all he did, but it helped. And in the end, the last thing, when we were getting back on the boat and saying goodbye to Kim, we gave him the money, and he's like, okay, I got to swing by the quarantine office and give half this to the officer there. So the quarantine officer was running the scam, illegally forcing everyone to get an agent, because then he was getting half of whatever the agent was charging the cruisers. So even though legally you don't have to have one, that quarantine officer is running, what at the time was running a scam. And I don't know, it was like 2 days later, another American boat showed up that we knew we had been anchored next to in Australia. And the wife on that boat was determined. She had studied Bahasa, and she was determined. She was like, no, I'm just going to clear us in ourselves. So they attempted to clear themselves in. The quarantine officer just refused. He's like, you need an agent. And she was like, I know the law, blah, blah. He's like, you need an agent. She threatened to, like, get the police. She's like, I'll get the police. Which you should never threaten an official. Especially in a small Indonesian town. Like, the police officer is probably his cousin. And then what? Then you're going to have to pay double bribes. You got to pay the police bribe and the quarantine dude. The quarantine dude laughed at her. He's like, get the police. So, in the end, they messaged me and I put them in touch with Kim. They had to hire Kim. So, at the time that I cleared in, it was impossible to clear in yourself at the Kai Islands to all Indonesia. I don't know what the situation is now because, like I said, things change. Another thing to know is, and this is what I'm told through the grapevine, but through someone that I know personally, was that there was some situation to where a boat came in 2 months after us, and they had given Kim $2,000 US to arrange a fuel delivery for their boat because there's no fuel docks anywhere in Indonesia. And Kim got the $2,000 US and vanished. Like a month later, the Indonesian Navy was looking for him, the police were looking for him, all this crazy stuff. So a few months later, I heard that he had sent text messages, but he had like kind of just gone offline across everything. He had said that he had gotten ripped off by the fuel person, and so he was scared and split town, but I don't know any of this firsthand. But 2 people that I know and trust, they were there when it all went down. So just keep in mind that. And Kim was totally on the level for us. He seemed legit, didn't feel shady. So I don't know what happened, but you never know. And again, legally, you don't have to hire an agent, but if the officials are like, you have to hire an agent, then you don't have a choice and you end up hiring an agent. It's better to do it ahead of time, contact them ahead of time, and it's better to get someone that other cruisers have signed off on and been like, we had this experience with this person. So keep that in mind wherever you're clearing in at. To clear out, I absolutely did not need an agent. It was very easy. But I'd also done my research. So most people avoid clearing out at, I can't remember the name of the marina, Noonsong or something like that, just across from Singapore, because that harbor master is running a scam up there to where he tells you it takes 2 or 3 days to clear out, forcing you to stay in the marina that he works at, really overpriced marina, for multiple days. And then I don't know what he charges as well, but it's well known that this dude is running like a racket because it only takes 1 day to clear out. There's no reason you would have to stay multiple days in a marina. So a lot of people avoid even clearing out there, and they clear out at Borneo, where I did, which is like 400 miles away, which is like a roll of the dice, or they clear out at Belitung Island. The year I tried to get out, which was, what year is this? 2025? 2024, when I had planned on clearing out of Indonesia, Belitung was a really good spot because it was like about 300 miles or less from Malaysia. So that was a good spot where you could clear out there and you just transit through, and it's not an issue if you're transiting through. But what had happened there at Belitung was that there used to be a dude that a lot of times in places when you visit, there'll be a WhatsApp that says, this is a local person that can help you arrange fuel, water, food. You can hire them as a driver for the day. So there's like these people in all the places, which is really handy, and I've used a lot of them. Everywhere I went, it's like, because like in Indonesia, the type of service like Uber is called Grab, and a lot of small islands it doesn't exist. So you're going to have to track down a local driver, and if you have one that people have already said this dude's good and this is what he charges, then you have a sort of baseline to like, and if he's trying to charge you double, you can be like, well, these people paid this, and they'll always be like, oh yeah, okay, we'll do that. So there was a dude that was a local driver at Belitung, and then he started running a racket with the immigration dude there in 2024. So all of a sudden, everybody used to clear it there because it was like there was no corruption there. And then suddenly this dude saw that he could like run a scam with the immigration dude, and they were splitting the money. So that took place for about 4 months, and a lot of people commented on No Foreign Land that it was taking place. But just kind of, he went from like being a taxi driver to being an agent, and he would force you to, that the immigration officer would say you needed a sponsor letter out, which doesn't make sense. Why would someone sponsor you if you're trying to leave the country? So he was charging $200 US for people to leave the country. which is like illegal. And there's a really good whistleblower website, like a corruption website on the Indonesian government website. So the government's trying to combat it. It's just such a sprawling, disconnected country that it's difficult. So I had messaged a number of people who had been hosed by that dude, gotten ripped off, and I said, will you please enter this info into the whistleblower's website? Because I couldn't do it because it hadn't happened to me. So I don't know if they did or not, but that's at least an option. So people either clear out of those two places normally, and luckily now that dude has kind of stopped running that game apparently, because and now if you look on there, they're saying that there's no fees or whatever, none of that stuff is required. What happened to me when I cleared out had to do with the visa renewal situation that changed overnight. It's too much to go into in this video, but I did an extensive video about the whole experience, so you can find a link to that in the description. And the problem is like they might change that again tomorrow. You never know. But do all the research you can to find out what the actual situation is before you arrive to Indonesia. One other thing I should mention is when we were applying for our visas to come into Indonesia, two things were required. One thing was for sure required for the visa application was that each person has to show they have an income of at least $2,000 a month to get a visa. So when we were entering, I had no problem. I make more than that. So my bank account, and you have to supply bank statements for 3 months showing that you've had $2,000, at least $2,000 in your bank account 3 months previous. Rhonda was on board. She had no income. She wasn't on my bank account. So she wouldn't have been able to get a visa into Indonesia. So what I did is I photoshopped her name onto my bank account so that, it looked like we shared a bank account and we had the funds required. I had more than what was required for both of us. So for the previous 3 months. So that's how we had to handle that, because otherwise she just wouldn't have been able to get into the country. Another thing is like when you're arriving, I can't remember which department, but you need, even though you're coming in by yacht, you need a plane ticket out of the country. French Polynesia's similar to where French Polynesia, you either have to have an $1,800 bond that they hold until you leave, and then hopefully you get it back, or a plane ticket out. Now there are these websites, I think that, I'll try to remember what they're called and put them in the description down below. Like, they're websites that give you spend $12 and you get a plane ticket out of the country that you don't actually have to buy. So the way it works is you spend $12, some kind of travel agent books the plane ticket and holds it for you under your name. You get to print it out and show it to the people, and what they do is it's just on hold. So it's an actual plane ticket. It's not a fake plane ticket. And you could go ahead and buy it. But the whole thing is like a lot of young travelers do this who are limited on funds, and a lot of times if you buy a plane ticket, they hose you and you can never get the money back. It's like so sketchy. Even if you pay extra, I've had it happen to me so many times. So there's a couple of different organizations that do these websites that are like, it's a real plane ticket, but you never actually buy it. And then if you're like worried about the time, like, okay, I need to hold this for 2 weeks, then you can pay a little extra, $15 or something. And then they'll hold it for 2 weeks so that if the agent, if the customs or immigration or whoever goes on to check to see if the ticket's real, it shows up as a real ticket and you have booked real passage out of the country for a specific time. And you would just book that like right before your visa would run out. Well out. So that's a thing to know with Indonesia. When I cleared in, that was a requirement. So we booked 2 of those sort of like fake plane tickets. Again, They're real plane tickets. It's not illegal. It's just a loophole. So we did that, and but I don't think that anyone even checks anything, to be honest with you. That was another thing I guess I'll go ahead and mention, since we're in the bureaucracy section of this, is I had gotten, and the visas change every few months. The numbers change, the layout, everything changes regularly. So when I got our visas, I got us 2-month visas that could be extended for 2 more months. This is something you could do when we were coming in. So I booked us a 2-month visa. So then as the 2 months approached, Rhonda left the boat and moved back to New Zealand before her visa ran out. And I went to renew mine. And when I went to renew mine, suddenly there was a requirement that I needed a sponsor to guarantee my stay, even though I'd already done this sort of whatever. But if you looked on the renewals thing when I was doing it, it said sponsor letter that you had to upload a PDF. In fine print under it, it said unless for cases of tourism. But there was no way to just ignore it if you're a tourist. There's no box to check, be like, well, I'm a tourist. So you still had to upload a sponsor letter even though you didn't need it because you're a tourist. Like, you don't need that at the airport if you fly in. So I just took a Word document and I just typed, I am a tourist. I made a PDF and I uploaded it as my sponsor letter. And they cleared my visa and all was good. So there's a lot of absurd nonsense when it comes to the bureaucracy in Indonesia. And because of all that, I had originally wanted to just push through the country in 3.5 months, and get through on one sort of within a 4-month period, so that I never had to do any of that stuff again. But that didn't work out for me, and I ended up being there much, much longer than I anticipated. So that's kind of all I can think to tell you about that, about the bureaucracy side of things. Again, it changes daily in Indonesia. It didn't cost me, it cost me $6 to clear out. So, because I didn't use an agent. And that was just for the green book, which is this weird little pamphlet you get that you don't need. But they charge you for the pamphlet to put all your paperwork in. So that's the only money I paid to clear out. No one charged me. So they were on the level. There was no corruption on that end clearing out in Borneo. But again, it put me 400 miles from the border, and you are allowed to transit through Indonesia. And I did go ashore and get water and all fuel and all that stuff. So it's technically you're not there legally, but it is very common, and they allow you to clear out 400 miles from the border. So it's not, if it was really actually illegal, then they wouldn't let you clear out so far from the border. So it is what it is. So that's what I knew to tell you about the bureaucracy of Indonesia, which is a huge headache. So before you're going there, make sure you get on Noonsite, get on No Foreign Land, and find out what's happening in real time. You can even message cruisers through No Foreign Land who are there or recently gone in around the time you are, and ask them for advice. We have an amazing community, so make sure you use that to your advantage. When it comes to currency in Indonesia, the easiest way to get money is ATMs. Now, I always use the BNI or BRI, I think, of the bank branches. The actual major bank branches, and Drake or something like that is also another one. But use the actual bank branch ones is your safest bet to not get hosed. I've heard of people having money disappear from their account when they used sort of nondescript ATMs, so that's never good in a developing country. But if you use the actual BNI and BRI, I use those for 10 months. Never had any problems. Sometimes they won't give you money randomly. There were a couple instances where me and Rhonda would try to pull out money where her card would work and mine wouldn't. And then the next day we would try it again, because you try to keep as much cash on hand as possible. And my card would work, but her card wouldn't. We never figured out the secret handshake with all that stuff, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So my advice is, like, if you find one where you can pull out a couple million IDR, try to keep, a lot of cash on hand. At the time I was there, $1 million IDR is $60 US. So that gives you the gauge. I would regularly set up like a note in my phone that gave common breakdowns with price to US dollars. So until I got used to it, I could easily glance at that to see what things cost, because it is like $1 million versus $60. It's like, whoa, like, how do you even get your head around what things cost? So usually like the 100,000 IDR is like $6 US. So, just kind of set up like a note system for yourself to help you get your head around that is the quick draw. For me, that's how I went about it. But ATMs are the best bet. I personally tried to go in and pull money out at a bank so I could pull more out, and they wouldn't let me because I did not have an Indonesian bank account. I talked to other cruisers from England who were allowed to do it, but I was not allowed to do it. So I don't know what the criteria is for that, but in my experience, it didn't happen to where I was not allowed to pull money out in the bank. I went in, they're like, if you don't have an Indonesian bank account, you can't pull money out. We also showed up to Indonesia with 4 million IDR, which is like, $200 something that we got in Australia. I would highly advise showing up with cash on hand, because I don't think all of the stuff we had to pay for when we first got there required cash. And most places in remote Indonesia don't do PayWave or take cards or anything. It's all cash. So you're going to want to keep a lot of cash on hand while you're in Indonesia. And when you get to Bali and stuff, you can pay by tap and it's easier. But for the most part, it's all small markets and stuff like that. So make sure you have tons of cash on hand kind of at all times. Getting fresh water in Indonesia is also a major, major challenge. Since there are no yachting facilities, you can't just stay at a marina and top up your tanks there. There's no fuel docks with fresh water or anything like that like we're used to in Western countries. If you don't have a water maker, as Tritea does not, you have to source a way to get drinking water. One of the ways to do that is buying 5-gallon jugs of it. In Indonesia, they refer to them as gallon jugs, even though it's 5-gallon jugs. But it's the kind that would go on top of a water cooler at an office. And usually the brand Aqua is a safe one to get. You can get those at any of the chain markets in pretty much every village that exist. Another option, which is more feasible and actually cheaper, is to find an RO water dispenser, so like a reverse osmosis storefront. There's lots of like houses in Indonesia where they have like a roll-up gate, sort of like a garage door, and they have an RO machine right in front of their house, and they sell water that they've sent through the filters and everything. So that's where I got 90% of my water while I was in Indonesia, were from these RO storefronts. And I would just bring multiple jerry jugs and fill them up, and then cart them back to the boat, fill up the tank, and repeat the process. The only time I was able to get water delivered in the whole time I was in Indonesia was at the strange little, there's like a weird little free Wakatobi Marina, which doesn't have any facilities. It's just floating docks that you could tie up for free when I was there. We flagged down a boat that was delivering these like 5-gallon jugs. A truck rather, that was delivering these 5-gallon jugs, and we asked them if they could deliver them to the dock. Agreed upon a price before they showed up, and then they showed up with all the things to top up the main tank and the jerry cans. Now on Tritea, I have 35 gallons in my main tank, and then I carry 20 gallons worth in jerry cans on the rails. So getting fresh water is a huge challenge. And even if you have a water maker, which is highly advised for cruising in Indonesia, there are many places where the water is too silty or too polluted and dirty to where you wouldn't want to be running your water maker. So you're going to want to make sure that you have your water tanks topped up when you're in clean water before you get into places like that. Now, one of the biggest surprises to me going into Indonesia was the fact that there is almost no wind in the whole country. And as I said, I was there over a span of 10 months. So it's not like I was there for 2 months and I'm stating this and I don't know what I'm talking about. I had read that it was really light wind before I arrived to Indonesia. Light wind and like almost no wind are wildly different things. Of the 3,000 miles that I transited throughout Indonesia, 2,000 of those miles I had to have the motor on. So I definitely was never told, it's like, oh, it's so light that you're going to motor 2,000 miles. Like, I never heard anyone say anything to that scale. Ever. The window for the good wind is like between May and November. So that's your entire window of sailing wind for the southeast trades. In my experience, even sailing during those times, if the winds were forecasted to be 16 knots, I found them pretty much always to be about 12 knots. They're a little stronger in eastern Indonesia because they're coming up from Australia and the Torres Strait. But the further you get into Indonesia, the lighter those winds get. I think we made it parallel to Ambon from Tual before the winds completely shut off. And then once they shut off, it was motoring all the way to Lombok, which is far. As I mentioned, I ended up getting stuck in Indonesia for the wet season. When the winds finally came back in June 1st, they came back in June this year. I had to motor for I can't remember, 60 or 70 miles from Lombok up towards Borneo. And then I had a lovely 3.5 day of all sailing, no motor. Again, my speeds were around 4 knots, 3.5 to 4 knots. So nothing like I was, that the luxury of sailing in Australia just before that, sailing up the Great Barrier Reef is a dream. You have all the currents with you. You have really flat seas because the Great Barrier Reef protects the water. And fantastic 20 to 30 knots downwind sailing. You get so spoiled sailing in Australia. To go from that, and even the sail from Thursday Island to Indonesia, fantastic sailing. But then once you get up into Indonesia, really light sailing. So, even spinnaker sailing, it was just brutal with no wind. Just motoring. The other tricky thing is the distances you need to cover in Indonesia because it is such a vast country. Since there are so many obstacles in the water and dangers, you can't wisely make night passages coastally. You can do them offshore. There's still some risk, but not nearly the risk. It's pretty much impossible to do night passages. So you can't be sailing in the dark near to shore in Indonesia if you're smart. Even with someone on watch, you can't see the stuff. So that means that you can't just sail slowly from one anchorage to another and get in after dark and like you could in some places. So you really have to rely on your engine to motor through everything to get there within daylight hours to your anchorages. So that the no wind thing was just bonkers to me. And had I known, if someone had told me you're going to have to motor for 2,000 miles, I would have skipped Indonesia. I'm not going there. That is insane. So, if I had known that ahead of time, I would not have gone to Indonesia. Now, I just did the inland seas, so I did the Banda Sea, the Flores Sea, and the Java Sea. I didn't go down the southern coast, which is the surfing. People that are surfers do that southern to hit all the surf spots. I do know that there's also very little wind up that entire route because of other cruises I talked to who did that route. And the bummer about that is there's no wind and giant swell from the Indian Ocean. So that's much worse to me than like flat seas and no wind. But again, I haven't done that route, so I can't speak to anything that happens on that. But I do know for a fact that people end up motoring that entire stretch too. And so much of it has to do with proximity to the equator. So just like you have the doldrums in the middle of the ocean, it's a similar situation to where the equator tends to neutralize. It neutralizes the trade winds while also creating really mean squalls and stuff like that. So just know, if you plan on visiting Indonesia by boat, you're going to be motorboating the majority of the time, no matter how you slice it. And I wish that I had known that ahead of time. So just a heads up on that one. While we're on the subject of motoring, let's talk about fuel. Getting fuel in Indonesia is a challenge. There's almost no yachting facilities in Indonesia, so you're not going to pull up to a regular public fuel dock, fill up your tank, and go on your merry way. There's only a handful of marinas in the whole country, and getting fuel has to be done either on a fuel barge or going ashore, or the few places where there are like docks where you can pull up to, and arranging for either to take a car to go get fuel or to have a local deliver you fuel. If you're in a very large boat, I know there are like some people in some places have had trucks pull up and deliver it, but that's going to come at a huge cost. There are 3 diesel grades in Indonesia. There's Dex, which is the highest grade, which is sort of like a low-grade diesel in Western countries. When I was there, it cost over $5 a gallon, so very expensive considering it's in Indonesia and it's not like that great of fuel. But it's clear, you can see through it. Dex Light is the next one down, and it's pretty cloudy. We'll have some water content and some particles and stuff in it. Definitely, you'll need to polish that fuel before you put it in your tank. You probably want to polish the Dex as well, just in case. You for sure want to polish the Dex Light. I set up a simple polishing system with like a raker filter and a pump to where I would polish it, pre-filter it all from one jerry can to another, and then you have your regular sort of filter system on your engine setup as well. But make sure you have tons of fuel filters before you enter Indonesia, because you can't find any filters or parts there. So make sure you show up with a ton of fuel filters, because you're going to need them. And then the 3rd grade is called Solar, which is like as black as coffee. It's subsidized by the government. Technically, foreigners aren't allowed to buy it. I would never in a billion years put that fuel in my boat, even polished. And it's really cheap compared to the other ones. Dex Light is like middle of the ground. It's still expensive for what you're getting. The fact that you have to polish it, it's more expensive than it should be. But those are the options. I always got the fuel myself. So there was one time where I went to a fuel barge that was it was on Laban Bajo near Komodo, and those dudes charged me the white price instead of the right price. It was a Permamex or whatever, like Perdamex, the government gas station. It was their fuel barge, and it had a gas station sign and everything. I took a photo of the same fuel station that's on shore of the price, and they refused to honor that price because it wasn't listed anywhere. And on Real Foreign Land, people had said that they got the regular price for the gas station, but those dudes charged me like an absurd amount per gallon. I can't recall what it was, but so they charged me the white price instead of the right price. But other than that, every other time I had to haul jerry jugs to fill up my diesel. That's the other thing. You want to have as many jerry jugs as possible when you go to Indonesia, because the only ones you can buy there are these really flimsy plastic ones that are pretty shoddy and also hard to find. It's like I couldn't find any jerry jugs whatsoever until I got to Marina del Rey and had them order me fuel to the marina. So you're going to be carting lots of fuel by jerry can, most likely. If you're in like a big fancy yacht monohull or a big fancy catamaran that has a large fuel capacity, you're going to be able to fill up in Australia, which will get you pretty far into Indonesia before you have to sort out fuel. But at some point, you're going to have to get fuel in Indonesia. So I would say set up a fuel polishing system before you arrive. I built mine in Australia, and I was very glad for it. It definitely saved me. But there was still tons of water in the fuel, tons of particles, and I went through all of my fuel filters by the time I left and arrived to Malaysia, all the ones I had on board. So that's the situation with the fuel. The other thing too is like if you hire someone, a local person, to bring you fuel, which a lot of people do because they're lazy and they don't want to deal with hauling fuel themselves, they will most likely charge you for decks and buy solar and maybe mix the solar with Dex Light or something so that it's not quite as dark. But chances are they're going to charge you for the top grade and you're going to get really bad fuel, and it's going to cause problems. So keep that in mind. If you're hiring somebody else to do it, my advice is just do it yourself. So go to a petrol station so you can watch it being pumped in. You know exactly what grade's happening. Otherwise, you're just kind of asking for trouble. As I mentioned, there are very few yachting facilities in the whole of the country. I don't know the exact number of marinas, but I know there's a marina in Sarong, which is like New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, the Indonesian part, that a bunch of cruisers stay at. There's it's not really a marina, it's just some docks that you can tie up to at Wakatobi. There's Marina del Rey on Lombok, which is where most Westerners leave their boats to fly out and go back to their home countries. There's Madana Marina, which is like just moorings, there's no docks, and that's also on Lombok. There's one little marina that I know of on Java, but they were full when I tried to stay there, near to Bali. There's probably one in Jakarta, and then there's one at that Noonsung at the top of Bintang Island, right across from Singapore. Other than that, I don't know how many more marinas there are. There are not many, and there are not many boatyards. Madana Marina has a boatyard where you can haul out and leave your boat on the hard there, and that boatyard's pretty cool, actually. I actually liked Madana Marina more than I liked Marina del Rey on Lombok or on Gili Gede, because you weren't so disconnected from everything at Madana. You were like on mainland of Lombok, but the problem is that it's all moorings, and it's that Anchorage is subjected to the worst sort of roll. It's like one of the rolliest places in Indonesia that I stayed, and I stayed there a couple times. Really nice people work there, a nice little cafe. There's some cruisers that kind of live there. Like I said, really cool little boatyard. I would have preferred to stay there, but it's so exposed that it was pretty brutal if you're staying on the boat. And also, I don't know that I would trust it during the wet season because of the storms and stuff. But Marina del Rey, it's the closest thing to like a Western style marina in Indonesia. I got stuck there, leaving the boat there for like 6 months. The Tritea got damaged there because they don't have like pilings that hold the dock in place, so they use the boats. Everybody has to med moor, and some of the boats are anchored, some of them have mooring lines, but they're using the boats to sort of hold the dock. So there's a lot of movement in the dock. The dock on my end during storms was almost ripped off, and it broke my tow rail because of all this movement of the dock. I was actually in Bangkok when it happened, and friends of mine were there and sent me photos of Tritea's tow rail got damaged in this big storm, so I had to fly back. I lost money on a plane ticket. I was supposed to go to Vietnam to do some travel. I lost all the money on that whole thing. I had to fly immediately back, re-secure Tritea because I didn't trust. Well, the Marina didn't even tell me the boat got damaged. My friends did. And then when I reached out to Marina, I was like, what's happening? And they're like, oh, no, it was fine. Just a little storm. Still didn't tell me my boat got damaged until I brought it up. So then I flew back, re-secured Tritea. I actually tied the dock to itself because the dock was coming apart. And I pointed it out. And the dock thing, the cleats were just sliding. So that marina is pretty ghetto. But the only sort of option, that's the closest thing to a Western marina. People that work there are nice. They're not sketchy, but it's really expensive for what it is. And at best, it's a place to leave your boat that's safe. One thing that makes it safe is that it's on a little island off the mainland of Lombok. And they have a security guard that walks the docks at night. So that actually removing it from the mainland helps with security. But there's no market there. You can't buy even basic food and stuff. So then you end up having to buy food at their overpriced, like, eatery, like their little restaurant bar thing. So you end up eating there quite a bit. It's really overpriced what it is. The food is not good. If you get the Indonesian food, it's really good. But any Western food is terrible there. There's an amazing French place around the corner. Alain, this Frenchman, his wife Sumatran. Really good food at their establishment. But again, you're paying for quite a bit for food. And if you're going to be trying to spend the whole wet season there, you could wear out your bank account real quick. And there's no way to there's nothing to do on the island whatsoever. So you would have to like dinghy over to the public dock and all this stuff. So I don't advise anyone trying to spend the full. And that's the other thing is like the marina fills up with rubbish, which is not the fault of the marina. It's just the way the tides flow. But it fills up with rubbish from all the rivers and everything. So if you have a water maker, you can't be running your water maker at that marina. And all the water has to be brought in by boat. So you have to pay to bring in all the water, drinking water, all that stuff. So it is like the best of the worst options, but at least it is an option. It is, if you want to leave the boat and fly back to your home country and not sit with pouring rain and storms every day for 6 months, then that's a good possibility. Or if you want to leave it there to go do travel elsewhere in Southeast Asia during the wet season, that's a good option, kind of the only option. But other than that, yachting facilities are very slim. There are also no chandleries to speak of. I found one in Bali that had an assortment of stuff. It's where I ended up buying my dinghy from, my rigid dinghy. I couldn't find any inflatable dinghies to buy in Indonesia other than ones that you couldn't mount outboards on. I looked at all the websites and all of them were as expensive as like high quality dinghies in the West, but they're not. There's, my silly Gary, my Fisher Price orange dinghy cost $700 US, which is crazy. I think Indonesia should be really cheap. It's not in regards to that. So there's no chandlery, so you need to have everything you can imagine as far as spares go on your boat. You can't ship things into Indonesia because they'll charge you between 100 and 200% duty. So the value of the piece times 100% is what they're going to charge you in tax, or 200%. I shipped in through DHL these little bitty rubber belts for my autopilot, and they charged me 150% of the value of the belts as tax on it. So shipping in parts is completely not feasible. You can't buy them in the country. So you're really sort of in a desert when it comes to marine parts. You can fly in with parts, but it's a roll of the dice. If they catch you, they're going to charge you whatever they want to charge you duty-wise. But I myself brought in a bunch of parts from the U.S. And I know other cruisers who flew in from Australia who brought in huge duffel bags, but everybody's same thing. It's just like a roll of the dice. Like when you're walking past customs, they either wave you over to x-ray your bag or they don't. I found if you fly in and out of Bali, there's so many white tourists coming in and out of Bali, you're less likely to sort of get like singled out, to where if you fly into Lombok or somewhere, they might be more like, hey, what's that big bag, you know? So Bali's a safer bet. Get some kind of like rigid roller suitcase that just looks like you're a regular tourist. Load that thing up with parts and cross your fingers. That's kind of the only way to get parts in to Indonesia without getting really hosed. So that's what makes Indonesia so challenging. If I could have bought the parts in Indonesia or anything like that, or if it was duty-free for yachts the way it is in almost every other country, I would have actually done a refit during the down season. I would have just put the boat on the hard at Madina Marina and did all my boat work there, which would have saved me a world of hurt. As it was, I ended up having to limp out of the country because as things started to fail, because I'm halfway around the world at this point. I have done 18,000 miles on Tritea in the last 4 years, and I don't care if your boat's brand new or like 100 years old. If you're putting time on the water, things break. And a lot of people are like, well, you just have an old crappy boat. It's not the case. Things break. So you need to have as many spares as possible on your boat before you get into Indonesian waters, because you got 3,000 miles before you're going to be to a place where you can actually get parts. Singapore, you can get parts. Malaysia, no problem, you can get parts. But anywhere in Indonesia, it's just not possible. So keep that in mind when you're planning your cruise of Indonesia. One topic I forgot to touch on when I recorded this video was the subject of piracy, or security. There are no pirate risks in Indonesia. There may be a little bit off the coast of Sumatra, far on the northeast side of Sumatra. That's a known area where there's bandits. As far as like yachts go, there are tons of boats that transit and hit all the surf spots. And I've heard of zero reports of anyone experiencing piracy or boardings or anything like that. Obviously, if you make things easy to steal, things will get stolen. But that can happen in any city or small town in America. Or any country in the world for that matter. If you leave a bike out in your yard overnight, it might not be there in the morning. So that's not uncommon anywhere that humans exist. So if you don't allow things to be easily stolen, chances are you won't experience anything like that. I've never experienced anything stolen from my boat in the last 4 years, more than 18,000 nautical miles, traveling through 6 different countries. But in regards to piracy, people who haven't been cruising always think that there's pirates everywhere, in the middle of the sea, on near land, everything. I made an entire episode several years ago talking about pirates versus bandits, imaginary bad guys versus real security concerns, so you can find the link to that down in the description of this video, and I go into great detail about distinguishing between that and knowing where there are piracy risks and where there are not. Indonesia seems to be very heavy-handed as far as law goes, so I think overall, in my experience, Indonesians were very law-abiding citizens, because I think the jail times and the punishments are so severe that it tends to keep people from committing a lot of crimes that you might see in Western countries. As you approach the Malacca Strait and the Singapore Strait, you'll get notifications about the risk of piracy, but this is for cargo ships. There is quite a bit of piracy concern in the Malacca Strait for cargo ships, but more on a scale of like people sneaking onto the cargo ships at night and stealing things, less so about sort of holding people for ransom. And again, I've never heard of any situations where there were boardings, kidnappings, ransom, any kind of actual piracy that takes place in Indonesian waters for the last 20 years. Get up into the Philippines, it's a different story. If you get on mainland Papua New Guinea, obviously very, very dangerous. So there are places in the region that are dangerous, but as far as Indonesia specifically goes, there's not a great piracy concern whatsoever. Anchorages. The anchorages in Indonesia tend to be extremely deep. Again, I'm speaking about all the anchorages on the inland seas on the north side of the archipelago. Many of them are like 40 to 60 feet deep. That's kind of the common depth. They might be rock, they might be sand, they might be coral. Really deep anchorages. I haul it by hand, and I don't have an electric windlass, so anchoring in 70 feet is a super bummer for me. There's only one place that I drug anchor, and that was in Tual in the Kai Islands. We drug during a big squall when we weren't on the boat. So that's the only place that I can think of off the top of my head where I drug. So most places that have good holding. The other nice thing about Indonesia, with the Banda Sea, the Java Sea, and the Flores Sea, is there's no ocean swell, similar to behind the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. There's no ocean swell, so there isn't this big, powerful, churning swell. So they're even kind of exposed anchorages are only exposed to the wind, and there's not much wind. There's not much wind in the dry season, I should say. There's plenty of terrifying wind in the wet season and storms. But when you're cruising through there at the time you should be cruising through there, the anchorages are pretty comfortable. I don't remember too many where there was maybe a handful where I used the roll stabilizer, but for the most part they were comfortable anchorages, and you're usually sharing them with local boats. Now, one thing I will say about the anchorages is out of 49 anchorages, only 4 that I stayed in were uninhabited. So, 46 anchorages had villages attached to them, lots of local boats, and mosques. So there would be anywhere between 1, depending on the size of the anchorage or the size of the village, 1 to 5 mosques, sometimes more if it was like a really built up area. And starting at 4 a.m. in most places, they blast call to prayers. At full volume for an hour. More than an hour, because there's like some kind of announcement, and then there's the call to, and then there's like the prayers, the singing, and all that stuff. So you'll have 4 to 10 anchorages. 4 to 10 mosques around the anchorage, blasting, all trying to compete with one another with the volume turned all the way up, just starting at 4 a.m. East Java, it's like 3 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. It's all celestial based, so it changes. But East Java, it starts in the 3 a.m. hour. They start blasting the call to prayer. And they do that 5 times a day. It never bothered me except for the early morning stuff. And I get up early anyway, but it is just like pretty oppressive noise pollution. And it's not just me that thinks this. There's plenty of articles online about it. Like it's a problem in Indonesia. It's not just, I can already see people in the comments, well, leave if you don't want to be here. They can do whatever they want. Yes, they can do whatever they want. Everybody relax. But it is noise pollution. And it's been said so much as by Indonesians. There's articles that talk about Muslims who are Indonesian who complained about the volume were sent to prison for 7 years for blasphemy. So, if you're a Westerner and you really dislike being woken up at 4 a.m. by extremely loud calls to prayers, I would say avoid talking about it on social media. And yes, it's their country. They can do whatever they want. But that doesn't mean that we don't have our own experience with it. So just know that that's a reality when it comes to anchoring, that there are not a lot of remote anchorages in most of Indonesia. I know I didn't visit Raja. I know up there's some more remote areas, so I can't speak to that. But 45 rather, of the anchorages I visited out of 49 were inhabited and had mosques. And that's just a reality. The other thing that's really difficult about Indonesia and the anchorages is the amount of plastic rubbish. So there is rubbish, plastic trash and rubbish everywhere in Indonesia, everywhere. All over the beaches, in the trails, like any off of the trail, in jungles, roadsides, you name it. And you'll see people just dumping entire bins into the ocean. They also, I found in many places in Indonesia, anytime there's a ravine, they'll just dump all their trash into the ravine because they know it's going to be swept out to sea during the wet season. Because the wet season, that'll just turn into a raging river, and they just know it'll all sweep out to sea. I've sailed past giant rafts of plastic trash out in the water, 100 miles offshore. I've had to dive on the prop multiple times to undo plastic that had gotten wrapped around the prop shaft and was causing problems with the engine or making it stall. So, but in the anchorages specifically, there's just tons of rubbish. So that's also a reality. And a reality that I never read anything about until I got there. And then I started posting about it and was surprised that, none of the other people that I had followed that had cruised through Indonesia really talked about the plastic situation. I don't know if people just want to pretend like they have like a dream life and only want to show that, but I was surprised at how little I knew about the amount of rubbish that's everywhere in Indonesia. So that's a little bit about the anchorages in Indonesia. While I'm on the subject of talking about things I didn't know about Indonesia before I arrived there, let's talk a little bit about the culture. Everything I had read by any cruisers who had come before, every single thing I had ever read said the Indonesian people are the most warm people you ever meet. They're the nicest. They always greet you with a smile. They're the nicest people ever. Now, I didn't meet any rude Indonesians, so there's that. But what I did find was that I never had a single interaction with anyone in Indonesia, an Indonesian citizen, where they were not trying to get money from me in some fashion. Now, I have visited 31 countries around the world, so it's not like I'm new to travel. I've never experienced anything like that anywhere to the scale of which it was in Indonesia. They either wanted me to hire them for a purpose, they wanted to sell me something, or they would straight up put their hand out and say, money, money, money. They would repeat money in English 3 times. I never experienced just generosity as I did in Fiji, in the Tuamotus. So in other places, at all. I didn't find any interaction that money wasn't expected to change hands after the interaction. Now, Westerners watching this are going to be like, well, it's poverty, this and this and this. Their poverty index for Indonesia is 6%. The U.S.'s poverty index is 11%. So they have less poverty in Indonesia than we do in the U.S. They also have the highest GDP of any Southeast Asian country. They actually have double the GDP of number 2, which is Thailand. So, yes, they are economically depressed because of their government. So there's so much corruption at the high end, but they have tons of natural resources in that country, from oil and gas to tin to all kind for a palm oil, which is also no bueno. But they have tons of natural resources, yet they don't have any drinking water. They have no rubbish collection and all that stuff. So it's definitely a failure in the government of Indonesia that trickles down, but it's also a culture that exists within the Indonesian people, in my experience. Now, so many of these people that were trying to get money from me had nicer and newer smartphones than me. And even in the villages, like the Sampala village, like there was like dirt huts. Kids had iPads where they were playing on the internet. So it wasn't like they were dirt poor, you know, and everyone had almost everyone had new motorbikes and stuff like that. So, yes, you know, obviously economically depressed population, but I've been in places where people were poor and they were generous and they would refuse any kind of help from you. They just wanted to, you know, share what they had with you. I've experienced that quite a bit. I never found that to be the case in Indonesia. It was always a transactional situation and pretty aggressive in most of the time, where they're aggressively trying to get money from you. I've never been to India, but out here that it's similar like that in India. So I was surprised by that, because everything I'd read from cruisers that had gone before, in my research, they talked about, you know, how lovely the people were and all that stuff. But I spoke to someone who's lived there for 12 years, who's an expat, and he's married to an Indonesian woman, and he said that they will rob you with the warmest smile you've ever seen. Like, they'll smile at you while they're robbing you. He's like, the smile doesn't mean friendliness. So it's something to keep in mind. And again, these are my first-hand experiences. I'm not telling you how to think. I'm telling you what I experienced. And I'm telling you that I never heard anything about my experiences before going there. So it's one of the reasons I make these videos, is to tell you what my experience is. You can take it however you want to take it. You can base it, you know, couple it with whatever other research you do, and then you have sort of a wider range of knowledge going into Indonesia than I did when I went into Indonesia. All right, let's talk about navigation. If you follow my channel, you'll know that when I was halfway through Indonesia, Navionics abruptly deleted all of the charts for Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and the South China Sea. Just like that. My subscription ran out, but they had even grayed out all of my charts that I had downloaded on my devices, which was shocking that they could remove stuff that I had already downloaded. I ended up finding a workaround for that, that if I kept the device offline, then the charts I had downloaded reappeared, which I think is criminal. I don't think they should be able to do that. As I said, my subscription expired. I tried to redo the subscription, and it wasn't possible. We went through, I made a video about it and caused a big stink online, and luckily my iPad still had all of the charts on it, so I just left it offline always. But Victoria called, Garmin was on the phone with them forever. They were kind of tight-lipped about it. Then she ended up speaking with the cart. She stayed up till 2 a.m. to call the cartographers in Italy for Garmin. Spoke with their office. They were kind of tight-lipped about it. But what we ended up finding out was the Indonesian government was forcing Garmin to pay them an absurd amount more than what they were paying for access to the charts. So they're in this legal battle and negotiations with the Indonesian government, which meant that they legally apparently weren't allowed to make access to those. But in my mind, I don't know how they were legally allowed to put everyone at risk who was using their product. So especially removing charts I already had downloaded. I already bought that. I already paid for that. That is insane. Now, I did a whole video on this. You'll find the link to that down below, so I'm not going to go into it again. And even a couple months after that, there was some glitch with Garmin, and everyone who had active subscriptions lost all their charts for 3 days. So I know people that were transiting, trying to get back to Australia, and they were messaging me being like, what in the world? Like, I have an active subscription and everything just vanished. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. So I told people my workaround, but even the workaround didn't work for some people. So I have sailed 18,000 miles using Navionics as my primary navigation. I don't have a built-in chart plotter. If you had one with a chip that wasn't connected to the internet, then obviously that wouldn't happen. I've been using OpenCPN on my laptop for the last 8 years, but I find it to be the most annoying app that exists for navigation. It's so clunky. It is like such a pain in the ass, but it's a good option. And as a backup, I've always had it as my backup. I also have used it for places where the charts were off in Indonesia or the Tuamotus, where places are uncharted or your inaccurate charts where they haven't been, kept up charting wise for a long time. A thing to remember is like coral is rock that grows. So if a chart hasn't been updated in 5 to 10 years, there could be new hazards that exist that no one knows about because, rocks have grown up in those places. Or even some of the paper charts for Indonesia haven't been updated since the 19th century or something. So paper charts are not feasible for near shore safe navigation at all in Indonesia. But with OpenCPN, a lot of the sort of places where I knew that Navionics was going to be off, I would do satellite overlay charts, and then I would plot my route in and out of atolls or through coral reefs visually, and then I would transfer those waypoints to Navionics and still use that as I would drive using Navionics while keeping my laptop open, because OpenCPN doesn't run on an iPad. And I use iPad, iPhone, and a MacBook Air. So OpenCPN I would run on my laptop, but I'm not going to have my laptop in the cockpit. You can't see it. There's the weather and all that stuff. So I'm actually going to buy an Android tablet as a backup to run OpenCPN on, because now I realize that it's just Navionics can just vanish. They still, at the time that I'm making this video, you still cannot buy those charts for Southeast Asia. They're not available publicly, which means that it's been like 3 months where people have no means of navigating through Southeast Asia with Navionics, which is crazy. A lot of people also had mentioned Orca tablets. The guys from Orca had reached out to me several years ago, but they don't have worldwide coverage. I think they're really cool. I think they could be the future of like tablet navigation. I think they're awesome, but they just don't have charts for anywhere in Southeast Asia, to my knowledge, and many places in the Indian Ocean. So they don't have the charting ability that I require for the places I'm going. Otherwise, I would. I think Orca's really cool otherwise. So hopefully in the future they get caught up and then they're the sort of industry standard, but it's going to be a minute, I think, before they're at that place. So OpenCPN is open source. You can download charts for different places. You can create satellite overviews. It's a great resource, but it is extremely clunky. I would like to find a built-in chart plotter now that isn't online downloadable, that actually takes a chip. Even those are crazy expensive. The chips are really expensive. Someone should start like a Pirate Bay for chart plotter chips so that everyone can trade chart plotter chips. I don't know how it works. I'm not going to start it. But if you're someone that knows how to do that, that would be a good service. So that was a crazy wake-up call to just have like all of my charts vanish when I'm surrounded by coral, and I was like 300 miles from safety or 400 miles from safely getting out of and even further if you consider going all the way up. But once you get to Malaysia, there's no coral. It's all mud. So at least there's that, or mostly mud. Not as much coral as in Indonesia. So from a navigation standpoint, that's something to consider as far as like something that happened to me that was shocking that I had never experienced before. And it's always good to, have very serious backups. Again, I had OpenCPN as a backup. It was always an option, but it's very difficult to navigate in the cockpit with a laptop. So that's why now I'm going to buy an Android tablet so that I have that as a backup on hand and ready to go. One of the biggest challenges of cruising in Indonesia are the fish aggregating devices, also known as FADs. So they can be the size of a house made out of bamboo, down to like the little flags they put on lawns, like to mark where a sprinkler is. Some FADs can be that small. And then they're attached to like a giant rope that's underwater that you can hit and prop your boat. I've seen the majority density of FADs are within a 10-mile range of shore, but I've seen them 30 miles offshore anchored in 5,000 feet of water. So even doing night passages offshore poses a risk, but doing night passages near shore is pretty much impossible. There are also between a quarter mile to up to a mile wide drift nets. So there'll be a boat with a drift net, and they'll have like little clear plastic water bottles as floats that span a huge thing. So most of them are about a quarter mile wide. And when you see them in the daytime, you'll see a boat at one end, and then there'll be a little flag on the other. So if you see a boat that's sitting stationary, and you use your binoculars, scan the sea surface in either direction slowly until you see a flag, and then that's how you'll know which way to go around it. Usually it's easier to go around the boat, but sometimes it'll be on one side of the boat, sometimes it's the other. So you have to find it and then look, and then it's also good to scan the other way, because you might see a flag on both sides. He might be in the middle, and there's like a mile wide drift net that you have to negotiate, or a half mile that you have to get around without hitting it. And there can be stacks of those nets. So there might be like 4 of those nets with 4 different boats back to back. So you might have to go really divert your course to get past all of these nets. The boats, there are no color regulations in Indonesia. So the boats will have, if they're lit at all, they'll have these flashing LED lights that are really dim, and they flash random colors. There's no method to it. The other tricky thing is they use the same sort of light for anchoring. So, and sometimes they'll put those little lights on the nets, but not always. And all the local fishing boats, none of those dudes are on AIS. The bigger ones that are more professional fishing boats that are closer to the Australian waters, they will generally have AIS hits if they're professional fishing boats. There's also illegal fishing boats out there that are unlit for obvious reasons and no AIS. You'll be motoring, like as we approached Indonesia, you could hear them pass and you never saw them. If you have radar, you could pick them up on radar. But the light thing is really crazy because the lights are so dim that the scale of it messes with you. So you think that they're on the horizon because they're so small and dim. And then you'll see the silhouette of the boat, or you'll hear the motor, and you'll realize they're like 2 boat lengths away, but the light looks like it's really far away. So that's something to know, that it's like there's so many risks. And if you hit, like we almost, as we were coming in to the channel at the Kai Islands, it was in the dark. And we came so close to hitting a giant FAD that was the size of a cabin. I could have touched it from the cockpit. That's how close we were. And my soul left my body. It scared me so bad. And then Rhonda sat on the bow with the torch, but it was like kind of misty, so you couldn't see anything. We saw several more, but we never got close to them. But she couldn't see them until we were right on top of them. So without like a good radar, and even then it's bamboo, I don't know how well, and the flags on the surface, there's no way radar could pick those up. So you could easily drive over those and get those in your prop, and then you're hosed. So the risks are crazy. And then the drift nets, I've never seen those lit either at night. So, and I've definitely seen the boats, they'll have a little light. And then a lot of times the dudes will flash you with a torch at night and then point in the direction of the net, so then you go the opposite direction of what they're pointing, or they'll point which way they want you to go. Who knows? But it is good to keep a high-powered torch if you're doing offshore overnight passages. Keep a high-powered torch in your cockpit, because they'll flash you to let you know that they see you, and then it's good to flash them back so that they know that you see them as well. After that, they tend to not flash you anymore. But I bought one of these crazy. They use these crazy giant headlamps for fishing and squid fishing and all that stuff, and I bought one of those, and it's really handy because it's absurdly bright. When you're first getting into Indonesian waters, the smart way to do it is to sail. If you're sailing from Thursday Island, you sail for 200 miles and then you turn up to Thursday Island. I have some friends who tried to cut a corner and do a rum line, and they counted 1,000 boats. No exaggeration. 1,000 boats in like 2 days, and they had to weave through them. And the good thing is they're all stationary, because they're all squid fishermen and stuff, but they're lit up like a city, so you can see them because they're giant lights. And that's the other thing, you can do night passages. You'll see what looks like a city on the horizon, and that's all the squid boats. So there's like massive lights, and they're sitting still, so they're easier to dodge than sort of like giant trawling, moving fishing boats. But still, at least you can see those because of the bright lights. But when it comes to nearshore navigation in the dark, don't do it. It is extremely dangerous. A good way to get propped, and then if you get caught up in their net, they're going to try to like hassle you for money, or call the police and tell them that you destroyed the net. So then you're going to get wrapped up in that whole drama. So making coastal night passages in Indonesia should be avoided at all costs. All right, let's talk about the seasons. There's the southeast monsoon, and then there's the northwest monsoon, are the two dominant seasons. The southeast monsoon in Indonesia is the dry season. The northwest monsoon is the wet season for Indonesia. Technically, the sailing season is between May and November. What I found to be reality was June 1st and December 1st. In my experience, was when you could sail safely without the risk of storms. The wind, I found, actually existed ever so lightly between June 1st and the middle of October. So that's when the wind was where you had usable wind. After that, you fall into the transition season between October and December, where there's like pretty much no wind whatsoever. I thought that I was going to be able to make it through Indonesia in like 3.5 months. I ended up getting delayed in Australia because I had to have the top end of my engine rebuilt in Lake Macquarie. So that delayed me 6 weeks, and then we got held up 3 more weeks at Thursday Island waiting for documents to come in the mail, which took forever. So we got so delayed that we got there really late in the season, and then Rhonda was really unhappy about how hard we had to push to get through and out of the country in time, which delayed us even further. And then by the time she left the boat in November, I was already too late. I went ahead and pushed as hard as I could to get out. By December 14th, I was 700 miles shy of reaching the Malacca Strait, which would have been given me safe passage up as the wet season changed. But by December 14th, I had already experienced the most dangerous and scary near-shore storms I've ever experienced anywhere in the world. I was seeing between 30 and 40 knots sustained for 2 hours near shore in waters that were like 10 feet deep, surrounded by shoals. Whiteout rain. I say whiteout because you couldn't see the bow because there was so much rain. The rain was so strong. You would see fishing boats pop out of the mist here and there during that. And a lot of times you get on a lee shore. So as I was trying to make it up the Java coast, the storms were so violent and scary, and my last of my autopilots failed, and I had to tap out and realized there was no way I could safely make it out of the country. I was so low. I ended up on that last day when I tapped out I ended up hand steering 77 miles, 17-hour passage. The storms are crazy. Like at sea, no problem. You just like shorten sail, you ride it out. But when you have a lee shore, when you have fishing boats and obstacles and all this stuff all over the place, and shoals, it gets really, really dangerous. Not to mention that you can't travel at night. It's just not feasible. Like you can't really get out. If you're too far deep and the seasons change, you're going to be stuck in Indonesia. I know it's possible to make it through in the amount of time that we originally had when me and Rhonda showed up, because another boat who we shared a bunch of anchorages with, a Finnish boat called Sailing Yacht Zelda, 36-foot boat, not much bigger than Tritea. They made it through no problem in the time. And we came into Indonesia at the same time. They even went up to Raja and went all the way, and they made it out before the seasons changed. So because they were both willing to push at the speed of which you need to push to get out. So that's something to keep in mind, that you have to really hold like a steady clip if you're going to try to get through Indonesia in the time allotted by the seasons. Okay, so the last chapter I wrote in my document preparing for this video is called "Was It Worth It?" I don't think I can actually answer that question until I cruise Thailand. In real time, Tritea is currently in Malaysia, so I've done Singapore and all the way up the Malacca Strait to Langkawi, Malaysia. I have yet to cruise Thailand. Now, the main reason I even went through Indonesia is like, oh, it would be cool to see this really, unique country in Southeast Asia. I knew there were some challenges, but to get to Malaysia and Thailand, you have to pass through Indonesia. So until I cruise Thailand, now if Thailand is as amazing as I think it's going to be, then I would say the hardships were worth it. But I definitely think it would have been a much better situation had I made it through in like 3 or 4 months like I originally planned. That would be my big advice to my past self, is like make it so that you can get through the country in that amount of time and not get stuck there for a wet season. So I can't really say if it's worth it or not. I'll have to kind of circle back to that after I cruise Thailand. It was the worst country I've ever cruised in, hands down. But that being said, it also supplied me with some of the most amazing experiences and highlights of my circumnavigation. From visiting the Sea Gypsy tribe, the Sempala village in Wakatobi. That was probably the highlight of my circumnavigation so far. Seeing a way of life that is just so different and like echoes sort of like centuries old nomadic life, where now they've been forced to sort of set up a stilt village on a coral reef. But that place, it doesn't have regular tourism. There's not like a jetty where there's like tour groups bringing people out there. It's pretty far removed. So it felt honest and legit as far as like the way of life that they continue. They still pull from the sea, and none of it felt like a put on. A lot of times like cultural displays will feel like it's made for like Westerners to be like, oh wow, look at how the natives live. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt legit and really special. So I got that experience in Indonesia. Visiting the Spice Islands, like I read a really amazing book about that, which made me head there instead of to Raja Ampat. So visiting the Spice Islands was really remarkable. To go to a place where it's the only place in the world that nutmeg and clove grew for centuries and centuries and centuries. The only place in the world, this one little island. That is fascinating to me. So, and then all the sort of like really gnarly history as far as like the VOC and the Dutch going there, and you know, getting to visit a place with such a crazy history was fascinating to me. And one of the reasons I like travel is like sort of time travel, to try to imagine places as they were. Seeing Komodo dragons, like ever since I was a little boy, huge bucket list check to see Komodo dragons. Getting to see monkeys, you know, sailing my boat so far that I could drop the anchor, having coffee in the morning. I was watching monkeys play on the sand. Like, that was a pretty amazing moment for me. Swimming with mantas. I've swum with mantas in many places. Beginning to swim with mantas in Komodo was awesome. Crossing the Wallace line between Lombok and Bali was really neat. Seeing the orangutans in Borneo, taking like a speedboat through the jungles of Borneo. That's like Indiana Jones level stuff. So there were many experiences in Indonesia that I think the further away from I get from like the really difficult aspects of Indonesia, that those will shine brighter in the long run than like all the hardships. But so far, it was easily the worst place that I've ever cruised, and I can't really say. But now that I'm like listing everything I just listed to you, I would say yes, it probably was worth it, but I definitely would have advised myself to not spend so much time in Indonesia, and do my best to get out well before the wet season changed. Thanks for watching. I hope this video helped you. I hope it was informative. You can hit, if there's anything that I didn't cover that you think I might have the answer to, hit me up down in the comments and I'll try to answer all those questions. This is everything I can think of off the top of my head to help you be educated and informed on what I experienced when going there in a small boat. I do believe that people with big boats, with water maker, large fuel capacity, and all that stuff would have had a very different experience than I did in my small boat. But it doesn't change the fact that you're going to motor through the majority of the country. Doesn't matter the size of the boat. That's a fact, a reality. It also doesn't change the fact that the fuel is dirty and difficult to get. So most of the things I covered can be applied to all size boats that are visiting Indonesia. And again, this is what I experienced firsthand, my take on it, and I hope it helps you in your planning or decision making when it comes to cruising in Indonesia. If you find value in this video and you would like to contribute, you can do one-off contributions through my PayPal, through Venmo, Cash App, or you can become a patron as a thank you if you find that you find value in the videos that I produce, either for educational or entertainment value. So thanks to all my patrons. I appreciate it. Some of y'all have been with me since the very beginning. And thanks to everyone who contributes what they can. I know times are tough, and I appreciate the contributions. These types of videos don't get many views, so I don't make much off of the ad revenue on a video like this. But I believe that they have really great value for cruisers, so I take my time to make this type of video, even though it doesn't really benefit me financially. I do it for the community and for you, to try to make your life easier than my life was before I went to Indonesia. So thanks for watching. Fair winds until next time. If you enjoy the content on this channel and would like to contribute, you can consider joining the Patreon crew. Thanks for watching. Fair winds until next time.